He lived in a small, weathered apartment at the edge of the city. The walls were thin, and the floorboards creaked with every step, but it was home. At least it was home for him and his little son. The apartment was modest, no more than 2 rooms, a tiny kitchen that barely fit a stove, and a bathroom that always seemed to have a faint smell of damp. Yet even in its worn condition, he had made it warm. A small rug by the door, a few framed pictures of his son on the walls, and an old stuffed toy that sat on the sofa were all reminders that, despite the hardships, life was worth fighting for. He had been a single father for a few years now. The separation had not been easy, and the courts and papers had left their marks on him, not just on his wallet, but deep inside his chest. There were days when he wondered if he was doing enough, if he was strong enough. Yet every morning he woke up, rolled out of the thin mattress he shared with his son for warmth, and faced the day. He didn't have much, but he had pride, and he had responsibility. That was enough to keep going. Work was never steady. He cleaned offices at night, and during the day, he tried to pick up small handyman jobs whenever he could. He had learned to stretch every dollar, to make groceries last for a week, to repair what was broken rather than replace it. Sometimes the fatigue pressed down on him so hard that it felt like he couldn't breathe. His back ached, his hands were rough and calloused, and sleep was often a luxury. But when he saw his son's small smile in the morning, or heard him laugh at something silly, all the aches and the exhaustion seemed to fade for a moment. That was enough to keep him going. The boy was 7 years old, full of curiosity and questions that never seemed to end. Why is the sky blue? Why do people have to work so much? Can we have pancakes every day? The father answered each question as best as he could, sometimes with truth, sometimes with a little story that made life a bit more magical. He wanted his son to grow up kind and thoughtful, to understand that the world could be hard, but it could also be full of wonder. He wanted him to know that even when life seemed unfair, there were people who cared, people who helped, and people who could change things by simply being compassionate, despite all his efforts. There were nights when he lay awake worrying about bills, about school, about what would happen if he got sick or lost a job, worrying about the little things he couldn't control. Sometimes the fear felt heavy enough to sit on his chest, but he pushed it away, reminding himself that worrying wouldn't solve anything. Action would, even if that action was just getting up the next day, cooking a small meal, and sending his son to school with a warm lunch and a hug. His life was simple, almost monotonous, but it had its small joys. On Fridays, when he could manage a tiny treat, they would walk to the park after work, holding hands and enjoying the rare moments of freedom from the daily grind. He would watch his son chase the pigeons, his laughter echoing in the crisp evening air, and he would feel a surge of hope. Life was hard, yes, but there was beauty in it too. In those moments, he felt like he could breathe again, like he could handle another week of struggles. One evening, after a long day of cleaning offices, he returned home to find his son waiting with a picture he had drawn in school. It was a messy drawing of the two of them, smiling under a bright sun. His heart tightened. He hung the picture on the refrigerator with a magnet, knowing that it was more than just art. It was a reminder of why he worked so hard, why he sacrificed sleep and comfort. Every small act of care, every smile, every hug, they were proof that he was doing something right. The apartment building was old, and the neighbors were a mix of people trying to survive in their own ways. Some kept to themselves, while others had formed small bonds over shared struggles. He didn't socialize much. Life didn't leave him the energy for it. But he was known as someone reliable, someone who would help carry groceries for an elderly neighbor or fix a leaky faucet for someone who couldn't afford a plumber. He didn't do it for recognition, only because he felt it was the right thing to do. Even with so little, He believed kindness was never wasted. There were days when the refrigerator was nearly empty, and he had to improvise dinner from whatever scraps were left. Pasta with a little butter and cheese, rice with vegetables, or sometimes just eggs and toast. He always tried to make it enough, always tried to make it feel like a proper meal. He knew hunger wasn't just about the stomach. It was about feeling safe, cared for, and loved. He wanted his son to always feel full in those ways, even if their bellies sometimes felt empty. School mornings were hectic. Breakfast had to be quick, lunches packed, homework checked, and the boy dressed and ready. Yet, in the chaos, they found moments of connection. A high five for a small accomplishment, a shared joke about a missing sock, a quick hug before rushing out the door. Those small interactions were the glue that held their world together. Money was always tight. Bills piled up faster than he could pay them, and he often had to make hard choices about what could wait and what couldn't. But he had learned to survive. He knew where to find discounts, how to stretch a loaf of bread into 3 meals, and which hours at work would pay the most. Survival had become second nature, and yet he never allowed it to strip him of his humanity. He never let it make him cold or distant. Some nights, when the apartment was quiet and his son was asleep, he would sit by the window, looking out at the city lights. He would think about the people around him, wondering about their lives, their struggles, and their joys. He imagined all the untold stories happening at the same time as his own. He imagined the small kindnesses that went unnoticed, the sacrifices people made for others, and the quiet courage that lived in everyday hearts. He had learned that life didn't always give you a choice, but it did give you opportunities to act. He had learned that even in the hardest moments, a small gesture could ripple into something much larger. He had learned that love didn't always mean comfort or ease. Sometimes it meant showing up every day, even when it hurt. And he had learned that hope, though fragile, was essential. Without hope, there was only survival, not life. It wasn't an easy life, and he often felt the weight of it pressing down on him. But he also felt a strange kind of pride. He was doing what he could with what he had, for the one person who depended on him completely. That responsibility, though heavy, gave his days purpose. It gave him a reason to get up, to face the cold mornings, to walk through exhaustion, and to keep trying. And yet, even in his carefully structured world, he didn't know what was coming. He didn't know that one evening, a chance encounter would challenge everything he thought he knew about struggle, sacrifice, and love. He didn't know that his life, already full of hardship, was about to become intertwined with someone else's desperate need. He didn't know that in choosing to help, he would create something miraculous, not just for them, but for himself. But for now, he focused on today, on making sure his son had breakfast, on working long hours, on keeping the apartment warm, on surviving, on living, on loving. Because even if life was difficult, even if the nights were long and the worries endless, he knew that small acts of care mattered. They mattered more than money, more than comfort, more than convenience. They mattered because they made life human, and they kept hope alive. As he lay down that night, exhausted from a day of labor, he listened to the quiet breathing of his son beside him. He thought about the past, the struggles he had endured, and the future, full of uncertainty, but also possibility. And though he did not know what tomorrow would bring, he felt deep down a steady certainty that as long as he kept trying, as long as he kept caring, life would continue to have meaning. And that was enough for tonight. For today, for all the days he had left. The day had started like any other. He had left the apartment early, carrying his backpack with a few tools and a small lunch he had packed in haste. The streets were quiet in the morning, a soft chill lingering in the air. He had a long day ahead, and his mind was focused on the work waiting for him. Yet life has a way of surprising even the most careful of plans. As he walked down a narrow alley leading to one of the buildings he was scheduled to clean, he noticed movement near a corner. At first, he thought it was just another stray cat or a bag fluttering in the wind. But then he realized it was a woman sitting on the edge of the curb. She was small, hunched over, with hair matted and clothes that had clearly seen better days. Around her were 3 tiny children, not much taller than her knees, sitting close together, their arms wrapped around each other like a single bundle. Her eyes lifted briefly when he approached, wary but desperate. The children were quiet, their faces pale, and their clothes torn. They didn't cry, but there was a stillness to them that spoke louder than any noise could. It was the stillness of hunger, exhaustion, and fear. He stopped for a moment, unsure if he should keep walking or speak. But something in his chest tightened, a feeling he hadn't expected, a pull toward them that left no room for hesitation. "Hey," he said softly, trying to keep his voice calm and friendly. "Are you okay?" The woman flinched at first, as if the sound of a voice from a stranger could be dangerous. Then, slowly, she nodded, though her eyes betrayed the truth. She wasn't okay. Not by a long shot. Her hands trembled as she adjusted one of the children on her lap, and she whispered something he couldn't hear over the soft hum of the city. He crouched down to their level, careful not to seem threatening. "Do you need some help?" he asked, keeping his voice gentle. He didn't want to scare them further, didn't want to make them think he would judge or leave. The woman shook her head at first, quickly, as if she had been told many times before that help wasn't coming. But then her eyes filled with tears, and her head drooped. One of the children reached out and touched her hand, small fingers gripping hers tightly. It was a gesture so full of trust and fear that he felt his chest tighten again. I don't know what to do," she whispered. Her voice was weak, almost breaking, but there was an honesty in it that pierced him more than words could. "I can't take care of them. I don't have food. I don't have anything." He didn't respond immediately. He felt a rush of thoughts. How could he possibly take care of 3 children and their mother? He barely had enough for himself and his own son. But looking at them, he realized it wasn't a choice of convenience or comfort anymore. It was about what was right. And what was right, he knew, was to help. "I have a little apartment," he said slowly, carefully. "It's small, but maybe you could come there for a while. Just until things get better." Her eyes widened, a mixture of hope and disbelief. You would let us stay?" He nodded, feeling a strange warmth spreading through him. "Yes. I don't know how long or how it will work exactly. But you're safe. You won't have to sleep outside tonight." It took some time, but eventually she agreed. The children clung to her as she stood, hesitant at first to leave the street they had known, even in its dangers. The smallest of them, barely 3 years old, looked up at him and offered a tentative smile, a tiny spark of trust. And in that moment, he realized that trust was a gift, one he could not take lightly. Walking back to his apartment was quiet. The children were clinging to their mother, their little shoes scuffing against the pavement. He led the way, careful not to rush, careful to make them feel that they were being guided, not hurted. She walked behind him, holding the youngest close, eyes alert and watchful, as if expecting the world to turn against them at any moment. When they arrived, the apartment was even smaller than he had imagined it in his mind. He worried it might be too cramped, that the walls would close in, that it might be impossible to care for them here. But then he looked at their faces, at the relief that softened the tension in their bodies, and he realized that this was enough. Sometimes a roof over your head, a warm place to sit, and a few kind words were enough to start healing. Inside, he moved quickly, trying to make space for them. He cleared a corner of the living room and laid out a thin blanket for the children. He handed them some snacks he had in the kitchen, simple things like bread, peanut butter, and apples. The children ate slowly, carefully, as if tasting food was a strange luxury they hadn't expected in days. The mother watched, a mix of gratitude and guilt in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered, voice trembling. I can't. I don't know how to." He said gently. "You don't have to do anything right now. Just eat, just breathe. That's enough." For the first time in days, maybe weeks, the children laughed softly. One of them dropped a piece of bread and giggled as it rolled across the floor. The tension in the room began to ease, little by little. And for the first time in a long time, he saw a spark of hope in their eyes. He didn't know how he would manage the coming days, weeks, or months. He didn't know how he would stretch his money, balance work, and care for 4 more people. But as he watched them, he realized that some things mattered more than convenience, more than comfort. Sometimes what mattered was simply showing up, offering kindness and being willing to face uncertainty for the sake of another. The mother eventually spoke more, her voice gaining strength as she realized that he wasn't judging her, that he wasn't going to turn them away. She told them a little of their story, how they had fallen on hard times, how she had tried everything to keep them fed and safe, and how the world had seemed to close in around them. He listened quietly, letting her speak without interruption, letting her release some of the weight she had been carrying alone. The children wandered around cautiously, touching the sofa, the rug, the small shelves. Their curiosity was quiet but persistent. They asked questions in whispers, eyes wide, voices barely audible. He answered each one as gently as he could, careful not to overwhelm them. It was a delicate balance, giving them security, showing them they were safe, while also making sure his own son's space and routine weren't completely disrupted. That night, he made a small dinner for everyone. It wasn't fancy, just rice with a little sauce, some vegetables and eggs, but it was enough. They all ate together at the small kitchen table, sharing smiles and hesitant laughter. He noticed the mother's relief as she saw her children eating without fear, and he felt something stir in him, a deep sense of connection. They were all strangers, yet in this tiny apartment they had begun to form a family. After dinner, he helped the mother set up a place for her and the children to sleep. He gave them extra blankets and pillows he had stored for guests who rarely came. He tucked them in as best as he could, telling the children gentle stories to help them feel safe. He stayed up for a while afterward, cleaning the kitchen, preparing a small breakfast for the next day, and thinking about the unexpected turn his life had taken. He didn't regret it. Not for a moment. There was fear, yes, and uncertainty, but also something far more powerful, a sense of purpose that he hadn't felt in a long time. He realized that in choosing to help, he had opened a door not just for them, but for himself. Life had handed him a challenge, and in accepting it, he had also found an opportunity for growth, connection, and hope. The mother whispered a quiet thank you before drifting to sleep. The children, exhausted but comforted, fell asleep in the small pile of blankets he had prepared. And for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of peace settle over him. It wasn't complete, and it wasn't permanent, but it was enough for tonight. He stayed awake for a while longer, sitting on the edge of his bed, listening to the soft breathing of all the children and their mother. He thought about the day, about the suddenness of it, and about the fragile trust they had placed in him. He understood that trust was not given lightly, and he vowed silently to honor it. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he knew that tonight they were safe. And sometimes that was enough to start building something extraordinary. He finally lay down, exhausted, but with a strange energy that kept his heart steady. Life had become bigger, more complicated, yes, but also richer. And as he drifted toward sleep, he realized that even in the midst of struggle, human connection, trust, compassion, and care could create a spark that nothing else could. Tomorrow, the real challenge would begin. But for tonight, they were together, they were safe, and they had hope. And sometimes, that was all anyone really needed to take the first step toward a miracle. The next morning arrived with a chill in the air, the kind that made the thin walls of the apartment feel even colder than usual. He woke before the children, careful not to disturb the fragile sleep of the little family he had taken in. The apartment felt different now, full, alive, yet fragile. Every step he took seemed louder, more noticeable, as if the small space itself was aware of the new lives it held. He moved quietly to the kitchen, preparing a small breakfast for his own son first. He had learned over the years how to make even a simple meal feel like more than just food, pancakes slightly browned, a little butter melting on top, a cup of warm milk. It wasn't fancy, but it was comforting. Soon the others would wake, and he would have to manage feeding 4 more mouths, making sure everyone got enough. Without revealing his own worries about money or supplies, as the mother stirred awake, she looked around nervously. The apartment was unfamiliar, the smells different, and the reality of their situation still settling in. She moved carefully, keeping the children close. He offered her a warm cup of tea, simple but soothing. "It's not much," he said gently, "but it's warm, and it's safe." She nodded, the gratitude in her eyes barely visible but unmistakable. Breakfast was a quiet affair at first. The children moved slowly, eyes still heavy with sleep, hands clutching at crumbs as if they had not eaten in days. He watched them carefully, making sure each had enough, making sure no one felt left out or forgotten. It was a delicate balance. He wanted them to feel at home, but he also knew that his son needed his attention, and that the apartment's small size would make chaos inevitable. The first challenge came almost immediately after breakfast. The youngest child dropped a cup of milk, spilling it across the small table. The mother gasped, reaching to clean it up, but he stopped her gently. "It's okay," he said. "Accidents happen. Don't worry about it." He grabbed a rag and cleaned the spill himself, smiling to show that there was no blame, no shame. The child watched him, eyes wide, and then smiled shyly. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. As the day unfolded, he realized just how demanding the situation would be. The children needed constant attention feeding, changing, comforting, calming fears, answering questions. The mother tried to help, but she was as exhausted as they were, her body and spirit worn thin by weeks of struggle. He understood that exhaustion all too well. Yet, despite it all, he found himself patient in ways he hadn't expected. Every small smile, every tentative laugh, every tiny sign of trust reminded him why he had made the choice to help. Laundry quickly became another challenge. The children had only a few pieces of clothing each, and washing them in the small sink took time and energy. He tried to organize the task so that no one felt embarrassed or uncomfortable. The mother watched, silently, as he gently guided the children through the process. Slowly, she began to realize that he was not just offering a roof, he was teaching them, supporting them, helping them regain a sense of normalcy that they had lost. Evenings were harder. He returned from work tired, muscles aching, hands raw from labor. Yet he still had to cook dinner, help the children with simple tasks, and maintain a sense of calm in the apartment. There were moments when he felt his patience stretch thin, when frustration threatened to bubble up. But every time he looked at their faces, the relief in the mother's eyes, the shy curiosity of the children, he reminded himself why he had made this choice. He reminded himself that every small act of care mattered, even if it came at a cost to him. One afternoon, the oldest child clung to his leg, asking endless questions about the city, the apartment, and even about the man himself. He answered carefully, keeping his explanations simple, trying not to overwhelm the child with too much information. The questions were innocent, yet full of curiosity and trust. The child wanted to understand the world, and he wanted to show them that it could be a safe place. Even if it was not perfect, that the mother watched these interactions quietly, a mixture of relief and surprise in her eyes. She had spent so long struggling alone that she had forgotten what it felt like to be supported, to witness small acts of kindness, to see her children feel safe and cared for. She began to speak more openly, asking questions, sharing stories, and slowly letting herself trust him. The bond between them was fragile, but it was growing, built on small gestures, shared meals, and the quiet knowledge that someone had chosen to care when no one else had dotted night. Putting the children to bed became a ritual. He told stories, soft and gentle, that allowed them to imagine worlds far from the hardships they had endured. The mother stayed close, sometimes joining in, her voice adding warmth and comfort to the small apartment. They laughed softly, whispered secrets, and for a few hours, the outside world ceased to exist. The apartment became a sanctuary, a place where fear and hunger did not dominate, where trust could slowly take root. Despite the growing bond, challenges continued. The apartment was small, and privacy was nearly impossible. There were moments when tension flared, when frustration overcame patience, when exhaustion made tempers short. He had to navigate these moments carefully, ensuring that no one felt neglected or unsafe. It was exhausting, but necessary. Every challenge was also an opportunity to teach patience, understanding, and resilience. He realized that helping others in this way was not just about giving. It was about learning as well. He learned about the deep resilience of the mother, about the intelligence and curiosity of the children, about the fragile beauty of trust. He learned that even in the smallest gestures, offering an extra blanket, preparing a warm meal, listening to a worried child, great change could begin. Meals became more than sustenance. They became moments of connection. They shared stories about the day, about school, about work, about small victories and fears. The children began to smile more, to laugh more, to feel secure enough to explore their surroundings. The mother began to regain strength, both physical and emotional, and he began to see the first signs that their lives could improve. He had to adapt his own routines to accommodate them. Work hours shifted, meals were prepared differently. Evenings became a mix of teaching, comforting, and managing logistics. His own son learned patience and empathy, witnessing his father's kindness firsthand. He began to help, carrying small groceries, tidying up toys, comforting the younger children. The family unit, though unconventional, began to take shape. There were still setbacks. A spilled cup of juice could start tears. Arguments over toys could end in frustration. Exhaustion could lead to impatience. But each time, he reminded himself and the children that mistakes were part of learning, part of growing, and part of living together. Slowly, they began to understand that safety and care were not fleeting. They were consistent, provided by someone who had chosen to show up that one rainy afternoon. He found them huddled near the window, watching the drops fall. The mother held the youngest child close, and the older children pressed their faces to the glass. He joined them quietly, without saying anything, simply offering his presence. In that moment, the apartment felt less like a cramped space and more like a home. He realized that home was not defined by walls or possessions, but by the people who shared it and the trust they gave each other. Night after night, the routine continued. Work, meals, bedtime stories, small chores, laughter, and moments of quiet reflection. He began to notice Change's children growing stronger, brighter, more confident. The mother's shoulders less burdened, her smiles more frequent. And himself, surprisingly, filled with a renewed sense of purpose. It was exhausting, yes, but also deeply rewarding. He had stepped into a situation that had seemed impossible, and yet, with patience and care, he saw that transformation was already beginning. He often reflected on the choice he had made. Taking them in had not been easy, and the days were long and demanding. Yet, in doing so, he had found a connection that enriched his life in ways he could never have predicted. He had found that compassion, when applied consistently, could create miracles in the quietest, most ordinary ways. And though he didn't yet know the full story of what lay ahead, he understood that this was only the beginning dot as he lay in bed each night, listening to the soft breathing of all 4 children and their mother. He thought about how fragile and beautiful trust could be. He thought about how easily it could be broken, but also how powerfully it could heal. He thought about how life, even in its hardest moments, offered opportunities to make a difference, if only someone had the courage to act. Tomorrow, there would be more challenges. There would be more spilled milk, more tears, more exhaustion. But there would also be more smiles, more laughter, more trust, and more hope. He had stepped into a life that was messy and difficult, but he had also stepped into a life full of possibilities, full of moments where courage and kindness could transform the ordinary into the extraordinary dot, and for the first time in a long time, he felt ready. Ready to face whatever came next. Ready to guide them through the struggles. Ready to show them that even in the smallest apartment, in the simplest meals, in the quietest moments, love and care could create something truly remarkable. The days continued much like before, full of small routines and quiet victories. But slowly, something began to shift. The mother and her children were no longer just surviving. They were starting to breathe again. Their laughter, once hesitant and brief, grew a little louder, a little more confident. The youngest child began to play with toys rather than cling nervously to the mother. The oldest asked questions with curiosity, not fear. And the middle child, once so withdrawn, now looked up at him and smiled during breakfast. It wasn't sudden, and it wasn't perfect. There were still moments of fear, of frustration, of doubt. But the small, consistent acts of care, the warm meals, the bedtime stories, the gentle guidance were beginning to take root. He could see it in their eyes, in the way the children moved around the apartment, in the way the mother began to stand a little straighter, her voice stronger, her words more certain. One morning, as he returned from a long night of cleaning offices, he noticed a flyer pinned to the community bulletin board near his apartment. It advertised a local organization that helped families in need, offering food assistance, clothing, and support services. He hesitated at first, unsure if they were eligible, unsure if asking for help made him weak. But then he thought about the mother and the children, about how fragile their situation still was, and he realized that reaching out was not a sign of weakness. It was a way to protect and care for them. He showed the flyer to the mother, who studied it quietly, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "Do you think they could help us?" she asked softly, almost afraid to hope. "I don't know," he admitted, "but it doesn't hurt to try." Together, they made the visit. The organization was welcoming, a small office filled with volunteers who smiled warmly at them, asking questions gently, making them feel seen rather than judged. They provided food packages, extra blankets, and even some clothing for the children. They connected them with a social worker who would check in regularly, offering guidance and support. It was more than just material assistance. It was validation. It was the knowledge that someone cared, that they were not alone, that the world still had people willing to help. The mother's eyes filled with tears when they left the office. She hugged him tightly, her gratitude spilling out in whispers. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "You don't have to," he replied softly. "We're in this together now." Back at the apartment, life began to feel a little less heavy. The children had more food, warmer clothes, and a sense of security they hadn't known in months. The mother found moments to rest, to breathe, to regain her strength. And he, though still exhausted from work and caregiving, felt a growing sense of hope. He realized that sometimes miracles don't come all at once. Sometimes they start as small ripples help from strangers. A warm meal, a moment of trust, and grow into something that changes everything. School became another turning point. The children, who had been absent or behind in lessons, began attending regularly. Teachers noticed the difference, a spark of attention, curiosity, and engagement that had been missing. They began to make friends, to laugh in the playground, to talk about their day with excitement rather than hesitation. And the mother, encouraged by their progress, began to feel her own confidence returning. She could see a future that wasn't just about survival, but about growth, learning, and possibility. He watched all of this quietly, often from the corner of the room, feeling a mix of pride and humility. He hadn't done anything extraordinary. He had simply offered kindness, consistency, and safety, but he saw how those simple acts could transform lives. He realized that sometimes all it takes is one person willing to step in, to care, to be patient, to believe in the possibility of change. There were challenges, of course. The apartment was still small, still noisy, still chaotic at times. Money was still tight, work was still exhausting, and nights were still long. But the burden felt lighter because it was shared, because support had entered their lives from outside sources, because the family was beginning to function as a unit rather than as isolated individuals. One evening, as they gathered for dinner, a volunteer from the organization visited. She brought more supplies and stayed for a short while, sharing stories and encouragement. The children, at first shy, warmed up quickly, showing off their drawings and telling small stories about their day. The mother laughed openly for the first time in weeks, and he noticed how the apartment seemed brighter, almost alive with the energy of connection. Later, as he helped put the children to bed, he reflected on the journey so far. It had started with a chance encounter, with a moment of instinctive compassion. And now, slowly, the threads of their lives were weaving together, forming a tapestry of trust, care, and hope. He realized that the ripple effect of kindness was stronger than he had imagined. His small act had not only provided safety, it had ignited a chain of events that could lead to lasting change. The mother began to contribute in small but meaningful ways. She started preparing meals, organizing the apartment, helping the children with schoolwork. She began to regain confidence in herself, realizing that she was capable of more than she had believed. The children responded to this stability with growing affection and trust, learning to share, to communicate, and to explore their surroundings safely. One day, while he was fixing a leaky faucet in the apartment, the middle child wandered over and asked, "Will we always live here?" He paused, unsure how to answer. He didn't know what the future held, but he wanted them to feel secure. "As long as we need each other," he said finally. "This is home for now, and we'll make it work together." The child smiled, nodded, and ran off to join the others. He watched them, a sense of peace settling over him. He realized that home wasn't just about walls or furniture. It was about trust, care, and the people you shared it with. Even his own son grew through this experience. He learned empathy, patience, and compassion, understanding what it meant to help others, to share space, to care for someone in need. He asked questions, offered small acts of help, and learned that family could expand beyond blood. These lessons, though simple, were profound, shaping him into someone who would carry kindness forward in his own life. The weeks turned into months. The family began to settle into a rhythm, each member finding their role, their place, their voice. They were not perfect, they argued. They made mistakes. They had days of exhaustion and frustration, but they were growing together. And that growth, though small and gradual, was miraculous in its own way. He realized that life had a strange way of working. He had entered this situation expecting hardship, sacrifice, and struggle. And while there was still hardship, sacrifice, and struggle, there was also transformation, hope, and joy. He had learned that sometimes the most extraordinary miracles are not loud or obvious. They are quiet, unfolding in small moments of care, connection, and trust. One rainy evening, as the family sat together in the living room, the mother holding the youngest child, the others playing quietly nearby, he felt a deep sense of contentment. They were safe, fed, and cared for. They were learning, growing, and healing. And he realized that the act of taking them in, though difficult and uncertain at the start, had created something far greater than he could have imagined. He understood that miracles were not about magic or luck. They were about people choosing to act with kindness. Even when it was hard, even when it was inconvenient, even when there was no guarantee of reward. And in that moment, surrounded by the laughter and warmth of the children and the mother, he knew that he had been part of something miraculous. The family had changed, but he had changed too. He had learned patience, resilience, and the profound impact of compassion. He had learned that even in the hardest circumstances, human connection could transform lives, including his own. And though he didn't know what the future would bring, he felt ready to face it, knowing that together they could overcome whatever came their way. And so, in the quiet of that rainy evening, with the soft hum of the city outside and the warmth of newfound trust and connection inside, he realized that life, no matter how challenging, always held the potential for miracles. Sometimes all it took was one act of kindness, one decision to care, to ignite a chain of events that could change lives forever. Months had passed since that first chance encounter. The small apartment that had once felt crowded and overwhelming was now alive with a different energy. The mother and her 3 children had grown stronger, more confident, and more joyful. Their presence had changed him as much as he had changed their lives, and he often reflected on the journey with quiet amazement. Every morning had become a symphony of routines. Breakfasts were lively, filled with chatter and laughter. The children had begun to take on small responsibilities, clearing their plates, putting away toys, and even helping each other with simple tasks. The mother had returned to part-time work, regaining a sense of independence and pride. She moved around the apartment with a newfound energy, her laughter filling spaces that had once been silent. He watched all of this with a mix of humility and wonder. He had not expected such transformation. When he first brought them in, he worried about how he would manage, whether he could provide for so many mouths, whether the children would ever trust him. And yet, the miracle had unfolded not because of grand gestures, but because of small, consistent acts of careworn meals. Gentle words, listening, patience, and showing up every single day. His own son had grown too. He had learned lessons of empathy and compassion that could never be taught in a classroom. He understood the importance of kindness, the value of helping those in need, and the joy of watching others flourish. He laughed more freely, played more patiently, and shared without hesitation. The bond between the 2 boys grew stronger, not just as roommates, but as friends who had faced struggle together and learned the meaning of support. School had become a place of progress and hope. The children, once behind in their lessons, began to thrive. Their teachers noticed improvements, not just academically, but socially. They smiled more, made friends, and participated actively in class. The mother, seeing this, often spoke quietly to him about how far they had come, how much hope she had regained. The apartment, once a space of survival, had become a home. Every corner held memories of laughter, small triumphs, and moments of courage. Photos of the children's drawings adorned the walls. The dining table, once used mainly for rushed meals, now hosted shared conversations, games, and storytelling. Even the tiny living room held warmth, a testament to the power of love and patience in transforming a place. One afternoon, he received a call from the organization that had first helped them. They had heard of the progress the family had made and wanted to feature their story as an example of resilience and hope. He hesitated, unsure if he wanted their private life shared, but the mother encouraged it. "If our story can help someone else, it's worth it," she said softly. The feature brought attention to their situation, but not in a way that felt exploitative. Volunteers brought resources, neighbors offered support, and the children were celebrated for their courage and growth. It became clear that their miracle was not only personal, it had inspired others. The community, once distant and fragmented, began to rally around them, creating a network of support that extended far beyond the walls of the apartment. Through all of this, he remained humble. He never thought of himself as a hero or savior. He had simply done what he felt was right in the moment. But the results were undeniable. A family that had been on the brink of despair was now thriving. The mother had regained her confidence. The children were learning and growing. And his own son had learned the profound impact of empathy and action. One evening, as the sun set, casting warm light through the small windows, he sat with the family in the living room. The children played quietly with their toys, while the mother brewed tea. He watched them, feeling a quiet pride and an even deeper gratitude. He realized that the life-changing miracle had not come from money, fame, or luck. It had come from courage, compassion, and persistence. "Do you remember the first day we came here?" the mother asked softly, smiling. Her voice carried a mixture of nostalgia and awe. He nodded, remembering the fear, the exhaustion, and the uncertainty. "I remember," he said. "It seems like a lifetime ago." The children giggled, showing him drawings they had made to hang on the walls. "Look, we made this for you," said the oldest, holding up a bright picture of the four of them together. He felt a lump in his throat. The simple artwork was a testament to trust, love, and the bonds they had formed. "It's perfect," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'll hang it right here." That night, as he prepared to rest, he reflected on the journey. He thought about the long nights, the fatigue, the moments when doubt threatened to overwhelm him. He thought about the children's hesitant smiles, the mother's weary eyes, the uncertainty of whether he could help at all. And he realized that every struggle, every sacrifice, had been worth it. He realized that life-changing miracles were rarely sudden. They didn't arrive like lightning or fireworks. They unfolded quietly, over time, through patience, care, and unwavering commitment. The miracle had been in the smiles, the laughter, the shared meals, the trust rebuilt. It had been in the courage to act when it mattered most, and in the humility to let life unfold naturally. Weeks turned into months, and the family continued to thrive. The mother eventually found a stable job, providing for her children with confidence. The children, now healthy, fed, and happy, excelled in school. He watched as they learned, grew, and discovered their own strengths. And he realized that the act of taking them in had not just changed their lives, had transformed his own. He had learned patience, resilience, and the profound impact of small, consistent acts of kindness. He had learned that compassion could create miracles, that trust could be rebuilt, and that courage often meant simply choosing to care. And he had learned that the human heart was capable of more than he had ever imagined. One bright morning, the family decided to celebrate. They didn't have much, but they made the small apartment feel festive. Simple decorations, homemade treats, laughter, and storytelling filled the space. It was a celebration not of wealth or grand achievement, but of survival, growth, and the bonds they had formed. The children danced, the mother laughed freely, and he felt a joy that was deeper than anything he had experienced in years. Later, as they sat together, the mother took his hand. "You saved us," she said quietly, "not just from hunger, but from fear, from despair. You gave us hope." He shook his head gently. "I didn't save you," he replied. "We helped each other. You all were brave, and the children. They reminded me why it's worth trying, even when it's hard. The miracle was never just mine or yours. It was ours together." The children nodded, smiling shyly, their eyes bright with trust and happiness. The youngest curled up against him, and he felt a warmth he hadn't known he could feel. It was the warmth of belonging, of family, of love earned through struggle and care. In the following weeks, their lives settled into a rhythm of stability and hope. The mother found confidence in her work. The children continued to grow and learn, and he continued his work while ensuring that the family remained strong and supported. The apartment, once a place of survival, had become a home of love, trust, and laughter. And in that small space, he recognized the true meaning of life-changing miracles. It wasn't in fame, money, or recognition. It wasn't in grand gestures or lucky breaks. It was in the courage to act, the willingness to care, and the quiet persistence to make a difference every single day. It was in the small moments that added up meals shared, stories told, trust rebuilt, and laughter heard. And those small moments had changed everything. He realized that his life, once filled with struggle and uncertainty, had been transformed by the very act of helping others. He had discovered a depth of compassion, resilience, and hope that he hadn't known existed within him. And he knew that, no matter what challenges lay ahead, he had learned the most important lesson of all, that even in the hardest circumstances, one person's choice to care could ignite a miracle that would change lives forever. And so, in the quiet of the evening, with the apartment filled with warmth, laughter, and love, he sat back and looked around. The mother, the children, his own son, they were thriving, growing, and happy. The miracle he had once thought impossible had become real, not through luck, but through courage, kindness, and the belief that one small act could make a difference. He smiled, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. Life had given him a challenge, and he had met it. He had taken in a struggling family, faced exhaustion, uncertainty, and fear, and emerged with something far greater than he could have imagined. He had discovered the power of human connection, the strength of love, and the beauty of trust. And in that moment, surrounded by the family he had helped save, not just from hunger, but from despair, he understood something he would carry forever, that life-changing miracles are possible, not because of luck or magic, but because of the courage to care, the persistence to act, and the heart to never give up on someone in need. The world outside continued to move, indifferent and chaotic. But inside that small apartment, a miracle had taken root. A struggling single father, a weary mother, and 4 children had created something extraordinary. A family built on trust, care, and love. And that family would never be the same again.